The War of 1812. February 1813. The war thus far. On February the 5th, Major General John Armstrong becomes the new U.S. Secretary of War, replacing William William Eustis. Armstrong has a solid military background. Prior to his appointment, he advocated concentrating U.S. forces against Montreal, the capture of which would starve Upper Canada out of the war. But once in office, however, he switches strategy to concentrate on attacks against Emmitsburg, Kingston, and Fort George and Fort York. 2 days after Armstrong takes up his new post, the Americans cross the St. Lawrence to raid Elizabethtown, Upper Canada, now Brockville, Ontario. The hero, or villain of the piece, depending on which side you're on, is Major Benjamin Forsyth of the U.S. Rifle Regiment, who in September 1812 led a successful cross-border raid against Gananoque, Upper Canada. See my September 1812 video where the raid is discussed. On February 7th, Forsyth left his current base in Ogdensburg, New York with 200 men, both regulars and militia, traveling 12 miles by sleigh to Morristown, New York, where they crossed the frozen St. Lawrence to Elizabethtown, which they took by surprise. Resistance was minimal, with 1 American and 1 British casualty. The U.S. will take 52 British prisoners, release 16 Americans held in the local jail, and liberate both stores and weapons before setting fire to the barracks and returning to Ogdensburg. While the raid provides a rare American victory, it is not pleasing to the local population, who have an unofficial truce with their Canadian neighbors, and they are afraid of retaliation, which comes swiftly. The British commander at Prescott, near Elizabethtown, and across the St. Lawrence from Ogdensburg, is an aggressive and prickly officer, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Pearson of the 23rd Regiment. Pearson wants to retaliate against Forsyth by raiding Ogdensburg, but is restrained by the defensive policies of his commander, Sir George Prevost. On February the 21st, Sir George himself makes a surprise appearance at Prescott on his way westward down the St. Lawrence to York to, as author Richard Feltoe puts it, quote, to quell the growing criticism of General Scheiff's administration of Upper Canada, end of quote. But that's a story for another time. Sir George puts an end to Pearson's ideas regarding Ogdensburg by transferring him to be the commanding officer at Kingston, effective immediately, and by ordering Pearson to leave with Sir George's party early the next morning. To replace Pearson, Sir George appoints Major Red George MacDonell of the Glengarry Light Infantry, a company formed from the largely Catholic settlers of the Glengarry district of Upper Canada. To cover the movements of his party, Sir George orders Red George to drill the troops on the frozen waters of the St. Lawrence as a diversion against attack. And here's where things start to get interesting. What is it they say? If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile? The American sentries are so used to seeing their opponents drilling on the ice, they pay no attention to them. Besides, it's really cold out. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Warren's Maxim of War, number 609. It is never too cold for an enemy to mount an attack. And as the boss is away, happily slain, as in riding in a sleigh, happily slain westwards, Red George decides it's time for the troops to play. Rough! Forming his men into two columns, he charges across the frozen river, hoping to take his enemy by surprise. He does. The main column encounters little opposition and is able to gain the village, but the right column, under Captain John Jenkins, has the misfortune of running into Forsyth's men, who, backed by artillery, inflict serious casualties, including Jenkins, who loses an arm to grape shot. The right column withdraws, but regroups and returns to the attack. Red George's force soon has control of the village, and Forsyth and his men are forced to retreat to Sackett's Harbor, leaving behind their wounded and a considerable amount of plunder, arms, ammunition, and supplies. So much stuff, in fact, that it takes most of the day for the victors to trundle it back across the ice to Prescott. Naturally, there is looting, although the British officers take pains to restrain their men and to return stolen property. Author Richard Feltoe provides the following amusing quote. In an interesting sidebar to this event, there are also strong indications that some of the women from Prescott took advantage of the British victory to engage in what today might be colloquially termed a five-finger discount cross-border shopping expedition, as a number were subsequently witnessed returning across the river to Prescott during the course of the following day, bearing various size bundles of items. End of quote. In writing his report on the successful raid, Red George follows the "it's better to ask forgiveness than permission" strategy, but Sir George has the last laugh when he claims credit for having ordered the raid. Wikipedia lists the casualty figures as follows. British/Canadian, 6 killed, 44 wounded. American, 20 killed, 6 wounded, 70 captured. Richard Feltoe has slightly different figures. British/Canadian, 8 killed, 32 wounded. American, killed 20 to 26, wounded and captured 74. You might think the raid would end the cozy cross-border relationship between the peoples of Pembroke and Ogdensburg, but you'd be wrong. The folks on the American side blame the raid and their losses not on their British friends, but on Forsyth and his men for having stirred things up. For the rest of the war, there will be no more military operations in this sector of the St. Lawrence front, and the good people on the New York side will soon be, once again, happily trading with the enemy. A good account of these cross-border, might I say, treasonous activities can be found in The Civil War of 1812 by Alan Taylor, a book I am currently enjoying. On February 16th begins the epic trek of the 104th Regiment of Foot, aka the New Brunswick Fencibles. They will be marching through the snowdrifts from Fredericton, New Brunswick, to Kingston, in modern-day Ontario. And yes, you heard that right, a distance of 500 miles. All right, 494.41 miles. Hey, I looked it up. But according to Pierre Berton, the troops actually walk some 700 miles through snow, ice, and biting winds, arriving at Kingston after an epic march of 52 days. 52 days without losing a single man. Wow. Just wow. Berton thinks this changes the course of the war. Quote, "This remarkable trek has helped to tip the scales of war. Directly across the lake, at Sackett's Harbor, an American army, poised to invade Canada, waits for the ice to break. Its target was Kingston. But now, with reinforcements pouring in, their numbers blown out of all proportion by rumor, that target has been changed. The Americans will attack York instead. The lifeline that links the two Canadas will not be severed." End of quote. Personally, I'm not so sure it changes the course of the war. But what do you think, dear listeners? We'll end the month by traveling all the way down to the Demerara River in Guyana, where the USS sloop of war, USS Hornet, encounters the cruiser-class brig sloop HMS Peacock. In the words of Wikipedia, quote, "After an exchange of broadsides, Hornet was able to rake Peacock, forcing her to strike. Peacock was so badly damaged that she sank shortly after surrendering." End of quote. The Hornet, under command of James Lawrence, he of "Don't Give Up the Ship" fame, is on a sortie with the USS Constitution, having left Boston on October the 26th, 1812, and eventually arriving off the coast of South America, where they split up. On February 24th, the Hornet had pursued a British merchant vessel to the mouth of the Demerara River, where they also found HMS Espiguet, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, at anchor, while HMS Peacock was approaching from the sea. The two ships fire broadsides at each other from close range, but the American ship is better armed, 32-pound carronades versus 24-pound carronades, and the American fire is more accurate. After the death of Captain William Peake, the Peacock surrendered, but it sank so quickly that some of its crew, and some of the Americans who had boarded her, were drowned. Wikipedia lists the casualties as follows: British, 17 killed, 33 wounded, 3 mortally. American, 5 killed, 4 wounded, 1 mortally. The USS Constitution Museum gives the following figures for the engagement. British, Commander William Peake, 130 men, 20 guns, 14 killed, 33 wounded. American, Master Commandant James Lawrence, 170 men, 20 guns, 4 killed, 4 wounded. Thus, February sees the appointment of a new and improved U.S. Secretary of War. Maybe. Raids across the St. Lawrence, an epic march of 700 miles, and naval action off the coast of South America. Who says this is a small-scale war? If this is your first visit to 1812 Channel, my name is Warren, and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events. I will also review a book on the war. I hope. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. And till the barrage lifts, cheers! Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix Here, that's PX Here. They show paintings of various winter scenes, such as I imagine Prescott and Ogdensburg would have looked like back in February 1813. The music is the stirring 5 Armies by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. Thank you for listening.